Isn't it funny how good science fiction storytelling always remains relevant, even decades after it was originally created? Today's story has some very telling themes for today's society, but also some unintentionally telling ones as well. I am talking about the wriggly, grotesque and also bittersweet story of Doctor Who and the Green Death from 1973. Thanks ever so much to David Green for requesting this story over on Patreon. For just £1 a month, you can become a distinguished follower and request your Doctor Who topic for coverage. Your name will be mentioned in the video, and your contribution will be greatly appreciated. Big shout out to Zendiatrix and Eris Steedman for recently signing up. You guys are legends. So, The Green Death was originally created by Barry Letts and Terence Dicks after becoming concerned about the climate problem of planet Earth.
I probably meant to say environmental rather than climate.
Let's keep in mind, distinguished followers, that Doctor Who in the 70s was political, extremely political. Doctor Who in the 70s was political. And you can come up with numerous examples about this. Curse of Peladon in particular was all about the UK's inclusion into the common market. You had Silurians and the Sea Devils, which had striking anti-war messages, and you had stories such as A Colony in Space and The Mutants, which touched on themes of colonialism. Politics was common, it ran right the way through, and The Green Death was no exception. In 1972, The Ecologist published an article titled A Blueprint for Survival, which is still widely available to read today. It touches on themes of decentralisation and deindustrialisation and how smaller communities can thrive without causing long-term damage to the planet. And this was the spark that ignited the imaginations of Barry Letts and Terence Dicks when going into the creation of this story. And therefore, this story is centred around the ongoing antics of a corporation titled Global Chemicals. Global Chemicals is putting forth the revolutionary tactic of harnessing fuels such as petroleum and diesel whilst using only a fraction of the oil current industries are currently using. However, the downside is the mass of pollution and chemical waste that it creates in the process. This would be to the chagrin of the local mining community, whose mine is about to be flooded by chemical waste, if it weren't for the fact that the company leader Stevens proposes a new era of employment and jobs for all. But of course, all is not well. Sprightly young whippersnapper Joe Grant is enamoured of the works of Professor Cliff Jones.
It's time that the world awoke to the alarm bell of pollution instead of sliding down the slippery slopes of... whatever it is.
A scientist, ecologist and climate protester who sees right through the seedy shenanigans of Global Chemicals. It is then that she goes to investigate with Unit and the Doctor in tow, and here we go. It's a climate adventure. Gruesome deaths, relevant themes and blood-curdling violence are all on the table in this story. The story is based in Wales, and some of the locations, in fact most of the locations, were filmed in Wales as well, the majority of which were in various collieries around the Glamorgan area. Stevens is a businessman who seems very certain of himself and of his project, but is he the one calling the shots? The Doctor and Joe sniff a rat, or is it a maggot, as soon as they get to this place, and it isn't long before the mysterious goings-on become apparent when people start to die and turn green. Like much of the later Tom Baker stories, you get that cool effect when people get infected by something and you get the patch with the glowing light. In other stories it's red, in this one you get a nice green one, it infects your hands, your face, and you die, and it is a very cool horror aesthetic visual. The Doctor and Joe get to meet the miners, they get to meet the company reps, and they get to meet the climate protesters, and the audience get to observe differing sides of the same argument from each of these different communities, which is interesting and in its own way three-dimensional. Meanwhile, Joe and Cliff are smitten with one another, and the Doctor is struggling with this slightly, having to go on adventures on his own just to pass the time and take his mind off the fact that he might just be losing one of his all-time favourite companions. It never states that Joe's his all-time favourite, but, you know, come on, it's Joe. In amongst all the allegories, adventure, excitement, action and horror of this story, I did detect a little something else that was going on here as well, and I didn't really pick up on it until the end of the sequence where the Doctor is faffing about in Metabolus 3. Because Jo Grant goes off to see Cliff Jones and investigate global chemicals on her own initially, the Doctor decides to pass the time by robbing a crystal. And he goes onto the planet Metabolus 3, which is a predominantly blue world where all kinds of nasties are chasing him, and it's a bit of a fast-paced caper, the type of which you don't really see much in Doctor Who, and I think it's very well edited, to be fair. It's kind of ahead of its time. There's this rapid cutaway between this and the action on Earth that's happening at the same time, and I love the way that when it goes back to the Doctor trying to steal this crystal, it's almost comedic in places where he's running away, there's giant birds flying over him, and there's even one scene when a tentacle wraps around his neck. Brilliant stuff. You also see another great example of parallel editing later on when opposing sides of the ecological thought process give different verdicts on the Stevens process, as it's called.
The Stevens process is clean.
The Stevens process must be based on Bateson's polymerization. And that means thousands of gallons of waste.
But the thing I'm talking about is not quite that. The thing I'm talking about is the moment after when the Doctor comes out the TARDIS all ripped and ragged and the camera zooms in and he's on the phone and he says, "I'll talk to anyone right now." It's at that point that I realise that they are trying to inject this almost superfluous amount of comedy into this show with a kind of forced slapstickness that you don't really see in classic Doctor Who. I think the only times when they touched on this with that level of severity were way back in the historical sagas of the Romans and the gunfighters, which are completely different stories again. Another example of this you can see a bit later on when Captain Yates does a kind of exaggerated stumble to the floor after being attacked by the Doctor. But this story's insistence on doing comedy truly comes to fruition during the seemingly unending task of making fun of the Welsh. I was born in Pontypridd, I grew up in Wrexham, I moved to the West Country in 2007. So alongside being literally filmed in Wales, this story is also set in the fictitious Welsh town of Llanfairpwll, a name which is presumably created to draw specific attention to the and characters of the Welsh alphabet. There are also a number of Welsh characters, namely the miners, a few of which I guess are actually played by Welsh actors, particularly this guy who's also in Spearhead from Space. But there are other examples when the Welsh accent is extremely exaggerated, such as this guy here, who draws from many Welshisms, including the old boyo. Joe even repeats boyo, having a bit of a giggle about it. If the name Llanfairpwll isn't intended to be a stereotype, then this guy definitely is. According to Wiki Fandom, the reason for these mild stereotypes is due to the fact that the story's writer, Robert Sloman, had bad experiences playing rugby against the Welsh. Very mature indeed. From my perspective, I'd say that these jabs at the Welsh lean further into the harmless than they do into the offensive. However, that's not really the thing that irks me. I just think it's kind of inappropriate for this particular story when the story is about miners. There are some clever little allegories, there are some nice little touches about how the mining industry is forced almost against his will to embrace the new tactics of these seemingly insidious corporations, and there are certain bits where you get these really nice poignant little moments. For one, there's this moment of solidarity between the ecological protesters and the miners, who would essentially be at odds and almost be on different sides of the political coin, but they come together in a form of unity in order to rescue Joe and the Doctor and one of their colleagues when they are trapped down in the mine. Still, the mining industry was a tough, grimy and dangerous job. Only a handful of months before this story was transmissioned, 7 men were killed in a colliery disaster in Yorkshire. So this intelligent conversation about an essential component of the working class being shoved aside just to have a dig at the Welsh is a kind of conflict of interest. You get the good intentions of Barry Letts and Terence Dicks pitching this story in the first place, and then you get Robert Sloman exercising his beef about rugby. Even John Pertwee gets in on this. He disguises himself as a milkman and goes full-on Welsh pantomime voice before he breaches into the Global Chemicals Corporation, at which point he then discards his milkman costume and then becomes I mean, this right here is played for laughs. The intention is to make people chuckle. And whether this has aged well or not, I genuinely could not tell you.
How's the old man, Doris?
Oh, what's horrible? Oh, lovely.
But one thing I can say about all of these comedy skits throughout the entirety of this story is weighing it all in and thinking about all the other themes and story beats that are in The Green Death. None of this needs to be here. It kind of just jars, and it serves no real purpose to accelerate all the cool stuff that happens in The Green Death. Speaking of which, alright, my dissing is over with. Now we're going to get to the brilliant thing. Distinguished followers, allow me to introduce you to the most effectively disgusting creature in the history of Doctor Who, revival and all, the giant maggots. Ugh. I am fully impressed just by how stomach-turningly horrid these things are. So essentially you've got 3 different types of maggot shots going on in this story. You've got ones like this where they're just still props made to decorate a scene, and that is what it is. But then you get these, which are just, wow, look at them go. I mean, that is the most realistic portrayal of a actual creature magnified to absurd Doctor Who proportions that there is in the entire history of the franchise. I mean it, the entire history. They just look and move so much like the real thing, and the way that their bodies are glistening, they got that grey sleekness, they've got those little red blood patches. They are absolutely grotesque, and just to top it all off, why? These things are absolutely vile, and I couldn't be more grateful to Doctor Who for creating that in the 70s. I'll say it again. Ugh. You've also got actual real-life maggots who were extras paid on the day to wriggle on cue at the behest of the director. There's a cool little shot here with a toy Bessie going through a small landscape of maggots there. That's very good. And you've also got these shots here, easily the most disgusting ones of the entire story. It's like my bin during the summer. So these giant maggots are the byproduct of the toxic green waste which has been flushed haphazardly into the mines with no care of consequence, and therefore they are wriggling around. They can jump in the air, for heaven's sake. They're like organic Cybermats, but worse. Instead of getting dignified red Cyberman fever, you get disgusting green fever. They are the party piece of this story. They are the centre attraction of The Green Death. And I remember seeing at least one topical comedy show in the 90s where they repeated one of the shots and everyone laughed like they were going, ha ha, that's crappy Doctor Who effects from the 70s. No, you're wrong. This is spectacular. It is the very best of its kind to this very day, and if you can think of a better example, please hit me up in the comments and tell me. So clearly these maggots are larger than the average maggot. They can jump and bite your neck, so they are horrible, and you wouldn't want one crawling in your bedroom. But you have to think about all the other monsters that have appeared in Doctor Who over the years. Monsters such as Autons, Daleks, Cybermen, Ice Warriors. When you can compare the bombastic tactics of those creatures to these, then you have no choice but to officially dub these creatures as a low-level threat, and one that can be neutralised probably fairly easily. Obviously the bullets bounce off them, that's a given. But then, explosives? Really? So the whole problem here is the fact that the mine has been flooded by toxic waste, and that is what has caused this outbreak of giant maggots. So how do you neutralise a maggot-riddled mine full of toxic waste? Well, according to the Brigadier, you pump it full of explosives. Which, of course, makes it worse. Once the mine gets exploded, which will create all kinds of catastrophic structural damage to the surface as well, then the maggots rise to the surface and you have an outbreak of maggots on the ground level. Congratulations, unit. And the method that they take to neutralise these maggots on the surface, having realised that bombs don't work, is more bombs. So with UNIT being a few resources short of creating anything as visually spectacular as carpet bombing, they instead fly one man in a small helicopter over the maggot site to drop individual small bombs. And I would later find out on Wiki Fandom that these bombs were actually toilet ball cocks. He's throwing toilet parts at them. And yeah, they explode on impact, but they're only small bombs. So he's got those in the foreground, but then you've got those in the background that aren't even going to get hit. What's this supposed to do? So in the end, they find out Fungus's solution. Fight nature with nature. The solution was right there all along. You just got to whisper to the trees and put your hands in the soil. It's classic. Bombs. So it ends with John Pertwee riding around on Bessie with Sergeant Benton, who is throwing big bags of fungus. Why did they get him to do that on his own? Look at him go there, Benton. Bless him. He's in his element. Meanwhile, Captain Yates is breaching the headquarters of Global Chemicals. Captain Yates has got his own subplot here. He doesn't wear a military uniform throughout this. He's dressed in a suit, disguised as a suit, and it's probably one of the most energetic and charismatic performances that Richard Franklin has ever done as Captain Yates, to my knowledge. He's really entertaining as this. He could almost be a spin-off character were they to ever do that sort of thing. Rest in peace, Richard Franklin. Great stuff. I do love UNIT, really. And it is during these scenes that we learn of the existence of B.O.S., an acronym for Biomorphic Operational Systems Supervisor, an artificial intelligence program designed to make everything run more efficiently, but in the end does the exact opposite. Remember I said about how this story was unintentionally metaphorical for today's world? Well, there it is. Obviously, you know what I'm talking about. They used AI, it's a bunch of crap, it's causing more harm than good. Yeah, as far as B.O.S. is concerned, this is definitely one of the more erratic, kooky, and also kind of fun computer software systems of classic Doctor Who. He really is a terrible fool. I mean, yeah, kind of fun to be around, but also maniacal and insane. He's trying to hook himself up to a load of other computers and take over the world or something, I don't really know. But he's really pissing off Stevens by just singing all the time. Stevens wants to get round to exercising his plan to cause total corporate hostile takeover, and B.O.S. is just having a laugh, and I'm watching this thinking surely this should be the other way around. Surely the human should be the one misbehaving and the artificial intelligence keeping him in line, but no, it's the opposite, and it is good fun. He's a good villain, actually. Lots of personality. He reminds me of Rufus Hound's portrayal of the meddling monk in the Big Finish stories. For whatever reason, the Doctor isn't particularly progressive when it comes to machines thinking in this story. He's kind of like dismissive of the fact that this entity can be alive in any way just because it's a machine, which is slightly uncharacteristic, but there you go. So the story reaches its finale with the Doctor and Sergeant Benton trying to breach the front gates of Global Chemicals, during which some of the maggots have metamorphosed into flies. Well, one of them has. And the fly is not as good as the maggots. He's not even really as good as anything. Not even as good as the Zabi. I'm sorry, but for all the goodness of the maggots, this creature is just not quite so good. And neither are the special effects that accompany it. But it does spit out goo, which is always good. And then the Doctor defeats it by throwing his cape on it, which causes it to crash land. And then he takes the cape off and looks at it and says, "What a beautiful creature." Going to be inclined to disagree with you on that one, good sir. He says that's beautiful, but he has a hard time believing that a machine can be alive. There you go. Horses for courses. Subjective, whatever the term is. Throughout this entire story, B.O.S. has been hypnotising people, brainwashing them to follow the corporate mandate. Hey, you having that one? And the Doctor reverses this by using the crystal that he robbed from Metabilis Free. He just waves it in front of them and they get hypnotised, or dehypnotised should I say, and that reverses the process. The story culminates when the Doctor breaches the headquarters, and so begins a kind of redemption arc for Stevens, who realises after a rousing speech from the Doctor that everything he believed about the Global Chemicals mandate has been extremely misguided. Stevens, turns out, wasn't such a bad fella after all, a bit of a Tobias Vaughan in his own right. He stays at Ground Zero, sacrifices himself, and everything blows up good-o. Unit wear gloves to put the dead maggots in sacks. Make of that what you will. But no storyline in The Green Death is more pivotal than the love story between Cliff and Joe. And Cliff is quite a charismatic character. Later on in the story, he gets infected by the maggots and he's lying on the bed almost dying, and he keeps on saying the word serendipity, which means happy accident, which pertains to a mishap that Joe has when she mixes the chemicals which will later be used to defeat the maggots. I don't know why he couldn't have just said that instead of being so cryptic, but there you go. The Doctor is trying to avoid the idea of this romance budding, maybe because he knows where it will culminate in the end. And so we get a kind of party atmosphere when all the protesters come in and have a big drink and a laugh. Don't know what happened to the miners. They just go to work or whatever. They get kind of written out, which is a shame. I think they should have been invited to the party at least, seeing as it was their industry that got completely wrecked during this. The miners basically don't win, and we are encouraged just to forget about that, which is a shame. But it is what it is. Here we are at the party. Everyone's having a laugh, and then you get what is easily the most heartbreaking thing in Doctor Who ever. Cliff and Joe are genuinely in love, and they are kissing each other and talking about getting married, and everyone is happy, and the Doctor is visibly heartbroken. All the charisma and all the energy is drained from him. He isn't outwardly dismissive, but you can tell on his face that he is blatantly heartbroken and depressed by this. And then it culminates in a scene where him and Joe talk about the future and the Doctor not being too far away and wishing Joe the best of luck, and they all gather in a group huddle, which the Doctor is not part of. He walks out of the house on his own at night time. He got a sheepdog running around, having a bit of a laugh there. And then he gets in Bessie and he pulls his face, and I just want to reach into the TV screen and give him a big hug. As goodbyes go, this is just, I don't know, does it not get you right in the feels? Well, it gets me in the feels. He drives off on his own, no music, no nothing, just complete, sombre nothingness. A distant landscape, Bessie trundling along, the Doctor by himself. It's so sad, it's so powerful, it's so effective, and I can't think of any other scene where the Doctor is just so openly upset and heartbroken. I don't know what it is about Pertwee's acting. If you wish to canonise the more recent storytelling of Big Finish, whereby Joe Jones immediately almost returns to the Doctor as an older woman, then feel free. But were you not to do that, then the time between this and his meeting of Sarah Jane must be one of real loneliness and contemplation for the Doctor. Just never let it be said that classic Doctor Who can't evoke the same level of drama that New Who can evoke. The only thing that comes close is the Doctor's goodbye to Rose Tyler, and you know, that goes a long way to make itself effective. You've got this really long scene where they have a goodbye and they talk about the future and they talk about past, present and future, and there's lots of tears and dialogue and music, and it's awesome and it's tear evoking in its own right. But this is just a simple set of shots, no dialogue, no music, and somehow it just works. Brilliant stuff. In terms of narrative credibility, The Green Death ends on an extreme high, and it reminds me that when things work in this serial, they work exceptionally well. I love the horror element of this story, I love the effects of the literal Green Death, and it's got some very interesting themes running through it as well. I read up quite a lot on this, and I used websites such as shannonsullivan.com and WikiFandom, and thanks very much to both of those sites for making research in this video a fairly linear process for me. And I also got the impression that the creators had to kind of toe a bit of a line here, whereby they wanted to run anti-capitalist themes across without making it aggressively anti-capitalist, which I suppose is why you had sneering corporate entities such as Global Chemicals and characters such as Stevens, but also provided the opportunity for Stevens to have something of a redemptive arc, meaning of course that people make mistakes and it's not too late to do the right thing. Interesting and three-dimensional in its own right. However, I do think that they try to overstuff this a little, and therefore there were a few loose ends that they didn't really have an opportunity to pull together at the end. I mean, the most crucial aspect of this story, when they weren't talking about the climate crisis, which was a real thing in the 70s and has been covered in Doctor Who since Planet of the Giants way back in 1964, they were also talking about the plight of working class people, aka miners, and it kind of just abandons that entire theme when the miners serve no narrative purpose. They get shoved to one side and it's all about the Doctor fighting maggots in a big computer, which is all fun and games and it's all what Doctor Who is about, but they didn't really see the politics through in that aspect. But at least they tried, and at least you get something out of it, and at least it's clear who the bad guys were and who the good guys were. So all in all, The Green Death is a good episode and there is lots of fun to be had. The visuals of the giant maggots and the parting of ways with Joe Grant are both fantastic elements, done top tier and shining examples of those particular things in Doctor Who. You will find them in The Green Death, and thank you very much once again to David Green for requesting this story for me to cover. What did you think of The Green Death? Please hit me up in the comments and tell me your thoughts, and thank you very much for watching this video. I will be back next week with another Patreon request. In the meantime, if you want to check me out on social media, please visit my Blue Sky page at thechosenchimp.bsky.social. You can also visit my TikTok there, and I will be doing a TikTok thing at some point. In the meantime, I hope you are all safe and well. Please, for the love of Pete and his world, have a good one.